So, one very interesting question that I just recently saw about Blade is, would the game be good? Welcome to the Video Game Fight School channel. Thank you very much for tuning in. Let us go ahead and talk a little bit about this particular possibility or scenario or whatever it is you may want to call it. Even though we know it is a little outlandish in a sense because the game is still far out, however, this is a concern that people have, and I think it's a genuine concern, especially when you take on, say, the divisive nature of people's views on a game like Marvel Spider-Man 2. Now, this is something that I think is very interesting overall because when you actually, factor it all down, it's a very cool question and it's one that we can explore in all kinds of different possibilities. But I think the best way that we can go is to, number one, admit that, we don't know. The game is not going to be out for a while. And number two, we also need to go ahead and say, well, what would make a superhero game good? Now, this is a video that is inspired by an audience member, RapSnap3044. Shout out to you. So this person writes and says, people are asking the wrong questions. The real question is this game even going to be good? Well, we haven't seen the game. We haven't played the game. We don't know what's cooking, what's brewing. But we do know that Arcane as a whole has made some really good games. I know a lot of people are somewhat traumatized by Redfall, or maybe in their minds, they just have seen Arcane not put up a game that, met the satisfactory nature of their other games, and so many of them blank out. And so this Redfall conversation, Redfall, is something that a lot of people seem to want to make such a big deal. Sometimes the studio gets it wrong. Sometimes management gets it wrong. But let's not be fooled that Arcane, both Leon and Austin, have not put out good games in the past, according to reviews, according to gamers across the gaming space. So this is something that is very important to be able to kind of pay attention to. But we're talking about a superhero game. We're talking about a third-person game because they haven't made a third-person game that I know of. I've seen a lot of people talk about this as well, saying, this is their first go at a third-person game. And I believe that that is actually something that we can also address and factor in the question whether the game is going to be good. So first of all, let's look at the technical side. Them not having done the third-person game in the past, does that mean that it's probably going to affect their gaming capabilities? I don't necessarily think that that is the case. In fact, in order for you to be able to do a third-person game compared to a first-person game, there are a few things that are different, but for the most part, the way your character is animated and the way your camera is actually done is, in my opinion, the biggest difference. This is coming from a game development perspective. I play in game development, and this is what I do for fun. I just literally, mess around on Unreal Engine, and I've been doing it for a number of years. And so third person and first person usually have those kinds of differences for the most fundamental part. The thing, though, is they're going to need to have their animators be doing a lot of work because on a third-person game, the camera is behind the character, and now you get to see all what the character is doing. And so the animations actually have to be pristine. They have to be on point every given time. And if they have good animators, if they get good animators into their pipeline, that's not going to be a problem. The second thing is the way the character is going to control. When a character is being controlled in a first-person space, it's different from when a character is being controlled in the third-person space, slightly in a sense, because now that camera has got to work in a different way. It's got to compensate for obstacles. It's got to compensate for, enemies. It's got to compensate for all kinds of things in the world. So if they actually play their cards right, they'll be able to ensure that, these aspects of the game are actually solid and pristine, which all they have to do is just follow game design paradigms, game design best practices with third person, and they'll get the job done. And then VFX and all kinds of different aspects that you need to put in a video game, like the flashiness, the combat being somewhat cooler than the regular combat system. These are the things that are really going to sell, and then sound and all other kinds of world design. So there are all these elements that I think are I call them basic anyways, and then eventually, depending on how they decide to structure the superhero game, these are the things that are going to all come together to then eventually bring this game from a gameplay perspective to be up to what players may enjoy. The other side too will be story and the narrative. Now, the reason I'm actually mentioning this is because many of you just recently, we saw the way Marvel Spider-Man 2 was received. A lot of people were not fans of a lot of the story beats. A lot of people were not too impressed by what the game eventually brought down the pipeline, even though its combat was somewhat I would say, accentuated. Like, some people say the combat was improved, but I go ahead and say, well, that combat system is not too different from what we had in Miles Morales. So when you say improved, I'm not necessarily certain how you mean. I think they added some elements, but the core basis of Marvel Spider-Man 2's combat was already highlighted in Miles Morales in 2020. So that improvement was kind of already done. So by the time we got to Marvel Spider-Man 2, they did accentuate that improvement and added some elements to it. So it made the combat really good for the game. There was no doubt about that. However, Marvel Spider-Man 2, in terms of its story, was disappointing to a lot of people because the way they actually used a lot of the different characters. In my case, I thought the biggest joke that they pulled on the game was having Mary Jane go out there and start fighting bad guys when they had characters like Prowler, Silver Sable, Felicia Harding, Yuri, Tombstone in the game. So that was, to me, something that ruined the darkness of the world, or the gruesome nature of the world that they already had. Some people disagree with me, but I say to them, go play the Arkham games and see if Vicky Vale actually went out there fighting bad guys. If not, actually doing anything to actually help the game. When in reality, in the Arkham games, they used their other anti-heroes and characters, like number one, the Bat Family, Batgirl, Robin, Nightwing, and even Red Hood. And they went ahead and got the anti-heroes like Catwoman, Poison Ivy, and, put them in a position where they were very pivotal in different aspects of the Arkham game because they had the capabilities to do so. So when you actually think about that, it really made the story kind of wonky, in my opinion, in that regard. But in terms of combat, the Spider-Man game was actually pretty good. Spider-Man 2 was actually good. All the Spider-Man games that Insomniac has done have all been pretty good. But it's not only about combat. It's not only about graphics. It's not only about, the Flash. It showed that this time people were kind of much more interested in wanting, say, something that was, I would say, pivotal, and something that could stand out in the overall game, design. And the thing is, a lot of people have put too much emphasis, for the most part, on looks, because the Insomniac Spider-Man games, they have this cinematic visuals, and so almost everything looks somewhat realistic, like you're watching a movie that's being produced by some big Hollywood studio overall. And I think this has been an emphasis that has been misplaced, because this has actually robbed a lot of people of possibly enjoying some other video games because it doesn't look like a certain way. And a lot of people online have not helped. They've perpetuated this nonsense, like, Nick Tech, who made fun of the Arkham games basically inadvertently by saying that, Arkham Knight was, or he made fun of Gotham Knights by saying that, Arkham Knight was 7 years old and so on and so forth, and somehow painted this picture that, Gotham Knights was an inferior game, when in reality, they were just two different games, and one of them pretty much had, its own design, done in a different way than, say, the other game. So when you kind of look and, take things into effect, graphics is not everything. The way a game looks is not everything. If people would just put that aside and actually explore a game for what it is, many of them will find out that what it is that they really like in a video game, is probably hidden within a game that looks different from one that they may have enjoyed in the past. I mean, if you think about, say, graphics and think about looks, you have to also concede that, Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League is a game that looks very good, but is not necessarily a game that a lot of people are looking forward to overall. So this is a very, very important aspect, in regard to thinking, about this issue as to if a video game is going to be good or what elements are going to make a game actually stand out. So there's a lot to actually consider. There's a lot to actually pay attention to when it comes to this conversation. But I think the Blade game is in that place where you just have to let the developers come to terms with what it is that they want to bring out and actually deliver that in due time. So I guess this question is one of those. We'll leave it there. And then as we continue to see more about the game, possibly see another gameplay trailer that will showcase some gameplay elements, possibly even see a trailer of the game within, say, the next 12 months or so, because apparently the game has been in development for at least 2 years. So this might actually be cool to eventually see what they have to offer. But these are my thoughts. I really appreciate you guys' time and audience. Thank you so much for your comments. Continue to leave them in the comment section. Let's continue to talk about Blade and other superhero games. We'll talk producing in another one. Thanks so much for watching. Peace out.